Steelers OTAs are just a couple days away, which means we're going to give you our top 5 storylines to watch for Steelers OTAs. I'm Chris Carter here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things of the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button if you're enjoying it. Hit the subscribe button to our YouTube page to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus episodes and our breaking news updates. If you want to help out the show even further, go on Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star review with a positive comment, do both at the same time, and you'll get a shout out at the end of the show. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. As you can see, unfortunately, no Jenna Harner for today's Friday episode. She was very busy, such is the life of TV reporters. We respect her, and we hope to get her on next week. But you got me, and I'm going to bring y'all the energy that I got. And I'm dealing with COVID, but I still got enough juice in the chamber to make this work. So I want to talk to you about 5 storylines. And 5 is always the number everyone does, top 5 this, top 5 that. But I'm giving you 5 storylines with OTA starting next week. I'm hoping to be recovered throughout the weekends so that I can be at OTAs and give you guys firsthand looks on everything. But we'll see how that plays out. Still, let's talk about the top 5 storylines. And I'll go through 1 through 5, breaking it down throughout this show and why I think they're most important and how they play bigger roles on the team combining with other players. But the number one storyline, we start with the top, and the most important that I think is the story, and you probably already know what I'm about to say, is does Stephon Tuitt ever show up? And it doesn't have to be the first day. It doesn't have to be even this set of OTAs because these are voluntary. But the question is going to be, does Stephon Tuitt ever get to show up this spring/summer? If he does, it is a great sign and a sigh of relief for all of Steeler Nation, because when Stephon Tuitt is healthy and on the field, he does so much for the rest of the team. When he's on the field, you saw in 2020, he had 11 sacks. He was the closest thing to TJ Watt, not Cam Hayward, when it came to sack production then. Imagine if last year Stephon Tuitt was there helping in the pass rush with the Steelers crushing everything in their way. TJ Watt would have had even less times when he was double teamed because so many teams have to honor Stephon Tuitt and Cam Hayward at the same time. It's been my biggest thing about the Steelers, about their defensive front and the roster that they're built over the past 3 or 4 years. They are a group that makes it so hard to decide who to double team every single play when everyone's healthy. You got to double team TJ Watt because he's the best edge rusher in football. You got to double team Cam Hayward because he's the closest thing to Aaron Donald in the NFL. But then you got to double team Stephon Tuitt too, because if you leave him in single, he's going to bully whoever it is unless you got a super stalwart offensive lineman in his way. And then when all that's happening, that allows opportunities for people like Alex Highsmith to get good one-on-ones and beat them. So all of that pressure just from 4 guys up front, that's the kind of stuff that you're looking for with Stephon Tuitt and what he brings. But also in the run defense, Stephon Tuitt is great at taking on double teams. If you watch his tape, and I know it's been a while since we've seen his tape because he missed the entire season. But if you watch his tape, he takes on double teams, he holds his position, and that created opportunities for players like Devin Bush to make plays, and he will be on this list eventually. But I truly see Stephon Tuitt being back and healthy as one of the biggest questions. And again, I'm not saying he has to be back and healthy for these OTAs. These are voluntary. And I know some people think, oh, it's because his brother died last year, and that's the only reason. I don't think that's it at all. Stephon Tuitt needed knee surgery, and had he gotten it when it was around the time that he was supposed to, it would have allowed him to come back. At least that's what we understand. And because of the unfortunate death of his brother, that postponed it, which made the timeline be very different. And he's a bigger guy, so it has made it more difficult for him to return and be fully healthy. The Steelers have maintained this entire time that he wants to be part of the team, and he's been rumored to be at the facility over the past couple months. So we'll see. Well, we may see, we may not see if he shows up. If he shows up, if he's there for OTAs, it will put to rest a lot of big questions. But if he's not, it still has the biggest question of the season. Is he going to be there? Because Stephon Tuitt is a major part of what could make the Steelers defense great this year if he's back and healthy. If he's not, then you're asking more of Tyson Alualu, who is back and working. We've seen pictures of him at the facility. We'd also be looking to see, if the Marvin Leal can step into a bigger role sooner rather than later. Can Montravius Adams help out more this year now that he's more than just a practice squad player? Can Chris Wormley get back to where he was? Can there be any of the younger guys at DT to step up? Can Isaiah Loudermilk, can he step up into a bigger role? All those questions are going to be pertinent. But if Stephon Tuitt is there, it takes all the pressure off of all those guys to have to be more ready to be starters right away or to fill that big a void, because Stephon Tuitt took up multiple roles. And again, him with Hayward in the middle makes everything easier for everyone else, especially on the pass rushers, especially on the run stuffers at the linebacker position between Miles Jack and Devin Bush. So to me, that's the number one thing we're looking for. And I'm hoping I'm be clear of COVID so I can be at the Steelers facility, giving you guys my insight. I'll be there with the Steelers Now team, Alan Saunders, Nick Farabon crew, trying to break things down and get y'all news as soon as possible. So go to Steelers Now, by the way. It's a free website. You can go check out our Steelers news at all times. I have a new breakdown on Calvin Austin and why he won't just be limited to the slot wide receiver. It's my new Carter's Classroom film study. I've brought that with me over to Steelers Now. So if you want to check out my latest work, that's where you can go check it out. It should be up around 7 o'clock in the morning Eastern time on the website. But we're gonna take a quick break. When we come back, I'm gonna take down two more topics in the next segment and two more topics in the final segment to finish out our top 5 storylines for Steelers OTAs and what we'll be watching for as these things play out. So we'll do that in just a minute. But first, I'm going to talk to you guys about betonline.net. Y'all know about betonline.net. The NBA playoffs are well underway. We're in the conference championship rounds. The Boston Celtics just tied it up with the Miami Heat. The Warriors and the Mavericks are going to be duking out in game 2 very soon. You can get all the information on that. The Stanley Cup playoffs, which are into round 2 of their own, and Major League Baseball, which is well into May, and things are kicking up there. All of that information is on betonline.net, your number one source for all your betting stats and sports information. You can also make it your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs to esports and more. So head to their website today at betonline.net, or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action when you visit BetOnline, where the game starts. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here on the Friday edition of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen every day. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Now, number 2 on the storylines here that I wanted to focus on that I think is the most important is another obvious one, and it's the quarterback battle. Who shows up for OTAs between Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, and Mason Rudolph? Now, as we understand, Mason Rudolph has been training on his own a little bit because he's putting a lot on him to get ready. But these 3 guys are going to be closely watched all through the offseason, mini camp, and then training camp. And if we get a chance to see all 3 guys throwing around each other and how they're working, best believe every single throw is going to be picked apart by the media, and that includes me. You're going to be looking at, how did this guy fit this ball down the sideline? Who's establishing relationships with which receivers? Those are the things that we're going to be looking at, and they are going to be important, because a lot of people want Kenny Pickett to win the job right now. There's a lot of people who feel like, well, you don't draft a guy who could have a lot of the same skill sets as Mitch Trubisky if you weren't going to start him anyways. So why did you even draft him? I still maintain, and I've said on this show several times, Kenny Pickett does not have to win the starting job this year. Ben Roethlisberger didn't win the starting job his rookie year. He had to take it from Tommy Maddox once Tommy Maddox got hurt. Patrick Mahomes didn't win the starting job his first year. Josh Allen took a long time to get in there, and so on and so forth. Heck, Lamar Jackson didn't win until the back end of his rookie season when the Ravens were like, oh, well, we don't have anything else to lose, and then all of a sudden he was really good. Things take time to develop, and the quarterback position is one of the hardest positions to develop in sports. But I do think that there's a good chance that Kenny Pickett could show up really strong and show a really strong demeanor in these practices, and you see much more conversation about that. Right now, I don't think the Steelers are going to give you any insight. When we ask Mike Tomlin, who's winning this, who's winning that, trust me, we're going to ask him, and trust me, he's also going to say, no, I'm not telling you. And he'll be saying it in more colorful ways. He'll find ways to work his Tomlinisms in. You know what I'm talking about. He has also a million sayings out there. So just understand, this is going to be a question that is not answered in OTAs. But what we will look for is who is establishing those connections with the receivers, who seems to be taking charge with the first team, who seems to be looking the most composed when they're starting to run more team drills and calling out different plays. Those are the things that I'll key in on and say, okay, this is where you give this guy the edge, this is where you give this guy the edge, and how does Mike Tomlin push different guys? I've watched several training camps in my time covering the Steelers. I remember how when Josh Dobbs was with the Steelers and he was just there, he loved to use his legs, and as soon as he would start to use his legs, Mike Tomlin would blow the whistle and say, oh, nope, that's the end of the play. And Josh Dobbs was like, what are you kidding me? There's all this spacing. He's like, I told you, I want you to use your arm and your head, not your legs. I'm not saying that he's going to make Mitch Trubisky or Kenny Pickett do exactly that, but he's going to find different ways to challenge quarterbacks to say, hey, I know what you can do over here. I know that you're strong in this way. I want to see how you can show me that your weaknesses are getting less, that you're improving on them and that you're making them into your strengths. Those are things that I'm going to be interested to see how Mike Tomlin handles. And again, it's going to be interesting to handle because when he did that with Josh Dobbs and he did it with Mason Rudolph and Landry Jones, they were all quarterbacks who you knew they were backups. You knew they weren't going to be the starters because Ben Roethlisberger was there. This is the first time that Mike Tomlin's going to put his fingerprints on his quarterback. That's going to be his own. All these guys are his. These are drafted by him or signed by him, and this is going to be him molding them into the players that he wants them to be. So that's the reason I'm going to be watching. Those are the things that we're going to be looking for, just the notes that we're going to add up so that we can have the full roster and full profiles ready on each of these players when training camp opens in late July. Now, your third storyline here that we'll get to, and we'll do this before the next break, is Devin Bush's state of mind and his state of play. Now, I can't tell you how much it is important that the Steelers linebacker position is much better than where it was last year. There were certain moments where they came up in important places. If Joe Schobert doesn't force the fumble on Jarvis Landry against the Browns, the Steelers probably lose that first game against the Browns, and they probably don't make the playoffs. You know, there were certain moments. I think it was Joe Schobert had an interception that he tipped off of Taco Charlton against the Titans. It was tipped off of Taco Charlton against the Titans. There's moments where the linebackers stepped up and made big plays. Devin Bush even showed flashes towards the back end, I'd say like the middle back end of the season when they were playing like the Chargers and the Vikings. I saw flashes where like he's starting to get it back, but it wasn't consistent. And that's what they need to see is consistency. Now we've seen videos of him training, not rehabbing in this offseason. And that's a major step in the right direction. I do think a bunch of what we saw from Devin Bush last year was him kind of like, okay, you rehabbed your legs, but you haven't retrained your legs to be NFL ready and your body to be NFL ready to say, hey, we're going to go out there and we're going to play the style of aggressive football that made you a top 10 overall pick in the NFL draft when you were coming out. And best believe the Steelers weren't the only team that were looking at him that way. There were plenty of teams out there that wanted to get Devin Bush. There were people who said him and Devin White were 1A, 1B of the linebacker class, and that Devin Bush's tenacity and maybe more, I guess, his technique and his speed and going sideline to sideline, that was going to be his asset over Devin White, whereas Devin White was the more overall just because he was bigger, stronger, could play in the hole a little bit stronger. He was the overall linebacker that everybody wanted, and he was the 1A of this. Now, the thing is that Devin Bush, when he was in his shape and he was fine with the Steelers, he was living up to that 1B status. He was playing really strong. His rookie season was very strong. He helped the Steelers do a lot of things. I brought this up the other day when we were talking about fixing the run defense. He was a big part of keeping Saquon Barkley contained in that 2020 season opener against the New York Giants. I just remember him going sideline to sideline, taking up gaps. Even if he didn't make the tackle, he was all over the place. And that was something that was a major asset to what the Steelers needed to do. And I can't emphasize this enough. This is why they have always seen the linebacker position is very important. It's why they went and got James Ferrier for the mid-2000s. It's why they went and drafted Ryan Shazier to try and fix that hole then, even when they had Lawrence Timmons and Vince Williams. That's why Mike Tomlin's first draft pick was Lawrence Timmons. There's always a serious price to pay if you don't have a strong leader at the linebacker position, kind of keeping everything together and quarterbacking the defense. Devin Bush, I think, was too much in his head to be that guy. And that was one thing that was talked about, that they were moving around the green dot. Joe Schobert had to take that over. I'd be very intrigued to see where is that green dot in this as this offseason rolls along. Who's calling out the plays? Miles Jack could take that over. Miles Jack is a guy who can do that. He's been a leader. He's a guy that can play that role. But when Devin Bush first arrived, he was calling out plays, and there was talking about a lot about how he was quickly adapting to the playbook and quickly adapting to the Steelers defense. And you saw how aggressive he was in his play as a rookie and as a second-year player before he got injured. And it wasn't just just reckless abandon. He wasn't just flying all over the place. He was flying to the right holes, to the right time, and he was attacking at the right spots. That's what the Steelers need to get back to seeing from him. If he can do that, it changes so much. So what do we want to see from these OTAs? If you're a Steelers fan, you want to see more confidence in just the drills, how he's taking things on. Are people talking about him differently? Is there more positive things? And again, OTAs, we're not going to learn everything about these guys, but it's just the little notes that we're going to see building up. Okay, how are these guys looking after an offseason, getting ready for training camp? So that's my Devin Bush thing. I said I was going to get to that when we were talking about Stephon Tuitt, but there are two more major emphasis points that I want to bring up in our top 5 storylines here. We've gotten to 3 of the top 5 storylines. We'll give you the final 2 in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, we got to talk to you guys about Built Bars, and not just any Built Bars, some new Built Puffs, and not the birthday cake ones, because I've been talking to y'all about the birthday cake ones, but they got these new ones that are straight fire. Y'all know me. I've always talked about how their double chocolate Built Bars are amazing. These are even better than those. It's the brownie batter Built Puffs. If you love brownies and you love it after you make the brownies, you got the bowl where the batter was at, and you want to just look up the bowl because it's so awesome. Imagine that, but in the form of a protein bar that's basically a marshmallow, and it's covered in chocolate. That's what these are, and they're so amazing. I've eaten a couple already. They mailed me a box on top of the birthday cake puffs ones, and you're thinking, Chris, you're eating brownie batter and birthday cake puffs? That sounds insane. You're probably just fattening up real quick. I'm not at all, even though I'm basically quarantined and I can't do nothing at home. The brownie batter Built Puff only contains 140 calories, but they pack 17 grams of protein, and despite all that chocolate and all that goodness, they're only 7 grams of sugar. These things are amazingly good for you. They're light on you, and because of the Built Puffs and not the Built Bars, they're even easier to chew and scarf down. So go get yourself some Built Puffs. Look up the brownie batter flavor, and they're amazing. And when you bring them home, you're going to love them because you're going to deliver right to your door from Built.com, and you're going to be able to enjoy them whenever you want as you're helping keep your diet straight, getting ready for the summer. But to do that, go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15, that's LOCKED15, LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off your next order of Built Bars or Built Puffs when you visit Built.com. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're continuing the show here and wrapping up our top 5 storylines for OTAs that start this upcoming week. So let's get into that, shall we? Now, remember, OTAs do start Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, so we're going to have another show Monday, but I wanted to give this as sort of a primer for the weekend. But our 4th storyline that I think will be very important is who takes charge on the offensive line. Now, we all presume it's probably going to be James Daniels, and it should be James Daniels. Dude was signed to a decent contract to come to the Steelers. 2nd-round pick from the Chicago Bears. Looked like a really good guard/center there. Is the guy that should be able to take the lead as a veteran and kind of say, hey, guys, this is the standard of play we got to meet to. That's what they were hoping Trey Turner would be last year. But remember, they only got Trey Turner because they were expecting David DeCastro to be that, and then he had an injury that kind of made him not be able to play anymore. And so they were kind of desperate at the last second. They said, well, we're going to get this guy and see what happens there. But I do think that the addition of James Daniels will make a difference, but I also don't think you should overlook the possibility of some of the younger guys in the Steelers taking a foothold in this offense. Now, Chukwuma Okorafor is a veteran that they brought back. I think he'll be solid, but I still have not seen Chukwuma Okorafor take that leadership role and that guy that steps up and is kind of the leader of the group. that might come from one of the other guys. Now, one of the other guys could be, I think, maybe Kevin Dotson. He's a guy that looked really strong his rookie season. There were flashes where he was starting to look good last year, but then he got hurt and he wasn't as available. And that was part of the problem the Steelers ran into with their offensive line, was they were so hard up last year. Now, Kendrick Green as the center, if he's the center, the center has to be a leading point. Your center can't be a guy who's not, good at communicating, good at talking, and good with being with the rest of the offensive line. It's going to be important. But I don't think that even if Kendrick Green does win the job, because they did bring back J.C. Hassenauer and they did sign Mason Cole, and with James Daniels, that's effectively 4 dudes that you could see battling for the center spot at one point or another. I think James Daniels is just going to fit in right at right guard, and that's where they're going to want to put him. But these other guys are going to push Kendrick Green to be good, and not just good, to be good, solid, and confident. And if he can't find that confidence this year, they'll find someone who does play with confidence at the center position. But to me, the biggest thing about this offensive line group isn't going to be about, trying to just be a run blocking group or just be a pass blocking group. It's going to be who can step up and be a leader, who can be the person that kind of brings the line together, because your best groups often have people that are the anchors that hold it down for everybody else, and everyone kind of follows. When the Steelers offensive line finally turned the corner in the early to mid 2000s, it was when you saw Marquise Pouncey and David DeCastro and Marcus Gilbert all kind of be those anchor players. And Ramon Foster was certainly a leader in the Steelers locker room, but he wasn't one of the dominant players on the field who then also was helping with that. And Ramon Foster was a guy, and you can listen to the Ramon Foster show any day of the week because he has his own podcast. But when you look at what Ramon Foster did, he was more of a stabling piece in that offensive line. And in those mid 2010s, when it was Marquise Pouncey, David DeCastro, and Marcus Gilbert, that entire right side of the Steelers offensive line mauled people. And it was that balance, that strength, that allowed Ramon Foster and Alejandro Villanueva or Kelvin Beachum or whoever was the left tackle at the time. It allowed each of those guys to kind of feed off of that and build success in the offensive line. They need guys like that to be the anchors of this offensive line. Maybe James Daniels is part of that equation. Maybe Dan Moore takes a step forward and he can be part of that. Maybe Kevin Dotson steps up. Maybe Kendrick Green can be consistent this year, because there were also flashes where he was starting to get it at times last year, but then they would quickly fade away because the game just looked like it was going too fast for him. Now the game should have slowed down for him. Now he should have a full season to be ready, and we'll see where he takes it. And they remember, the big reason they liked Kendrick Green was because he was tenacious in college and because of how physical he can get. And there were times last year he was certainly physical. It was just at the wrong times, and oftentimes it was more so like kind of like being more scrappy. And you want that's good to have, but you want a player to develop that more. So all things aside, I do think the offensive line, there's certain goals you want them to meet, but in OTAs, I'm going to be watching for who leads the huddles, who leads the conversation, who do people look to ask questions the most. If it's James Daniels, if it's one of those guys, I think it's going to be a major interesting point to see who's that guy that everyone kind of rallies around the offensive line to turn things around. If it's nobody and we don't even start to get a sense of that, doesn't mean it won't happen for training camp, but it will be something that we continue to talk about, because we do want to see that leadership role develop for the Steelers sooner rather than later for this offensive line. And for my fifth storyline and talking point for OTAs for you guys to watch for and get ready for, it's a similar question of the cornerback room. And that's because the Steelers went out, they kept Ahkello Witherspoon, they still have Cam Sutton, they went and got Levi Wallace. They're in a position where they now have these guys that they've added to the roster, and I said from all again, these are guys that all look like solid CB2s, but there's no proven CB1 who's been with the team for a considerable amount of time. And that's where you're kind of looking for the person to fill Joe Hayden's shoes. Even though Joe Hayden was not the Joe Hayden of old, he was not a supreme playmaker anymore. He was a guy who could set the tone for everyone. And I've told you this a bunch if you've listened to the show over the years, but there's so many times that I would be watching a practice, training camp, practice during the week, whenever, and you would see Joe Hayden out there just leading the group. Whenever they were kind of stretching and getting things going, he'd be the one talking. They'd all circle up around him, and he would kind of get that going. That's what you want out of a leader in the cornerback room to help with that. Now, I think Minkah Fitzpatrick's going to be that for the secondary as a whole. But when the cornerbacks are working by themselves, you want to see a leader emerge. And maybe it's going to be Ahkello Witherspoon. Maybe it's going to be Cam Sutton because he'll basically be the veteran in the room that's been with the team the longest of the group. Maybe it's Levi Wallace. Who knows? But somebody needs to step up there to set a tone that's going to be able to say, hey, this is our identity, because that's one of the bigger questions of the marks of this defense. I know I've talked about Stephon Tuitt. I know I've talked about Devin Bush, but we don't know the identity of these Steelers cornerbacks as a group now, because Joe Hayden's gone, Steven Nelson's gone, Mike Hilton's gone, Cam Sutton is the only guy kind of hanging around. We saw Ahkello Witherspoon for a little bit last year, and the little bit we saw was very good. And if he can expand upon what we saw in his limited sample size last year, he will be a CB1. But that's why I say CB2 for now, because we haven't seen that expanded example of him taking on number one receivers, taking them out of the game, or at least challenging them so that they're not having their way with the Steelers during the game, and making it so that the other players on the field are getting more opportunities to go their way, and offenses don't get to just do whatever they want to their top receivers. That's what I think has to develop here. Is there has to be a guy that steps into that role and says, hey, this is my spot now. I'm taking on the number one receivers. I'm calling the shots, and I'm helping everyone else feed off of my energy. If someone steps into that role, it really helps the Steelers out. So what are we looking for in OTAs? You're looking for that guy who is that person that kind of sets that tone. Is there a guy that the other corners follow around? Is there a guy that sort of sets that tone? Cam Sutton, I think, is a vocal leader. He's a very smart player. I've talked to that man a lot over his time with the Steelers, and I think that he can be a guy that helps teach and helps make sure everyone else is on the same page. But it's not enough to know. It's not enough to teach. It's not enough to just be a good person and a good person in the locker room. You gotta be a playmaker. And I'm a guy who I've seen Cam Sutton make plays, but he hasn't made the game-changing plays. And there were some game-changing plays that Ahkello Witherspoon made last year. That's why I think he could be the guy. But it's no given, and it has to be proven on the field. So what we're going to look to see is in OTAs, does anyone set that early tone? That's something that we'll try to see when we're at practice at the UPMC Rooney Sports Complex and see how it plays out, because who knows? That could be another thing, just like the offensive line. Maybe we don't get a sense of who's the leader of that group. But if we do, it's a better sign than not having anything, and it gives us something to look for when they do their official mini camp, when everyone has to be there, and then, of course, training camp, when we'll be looking at the Steelers in full force with pads, playing and getting ready for the preseason in full strength. So those are your top 5 storylines. Will Stephon Tuitt return during OTAs, and how will he look if he can be back for training camp? Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, Mason Rudolph with the quarterback battle. Who's setting the early tones with the receivers? Who's looking the sharpest when they're running their team drills? Devin Bush's state of mind and state of play. Will he be back full strength? Can he get back to the linebacker position that he was before he was hurt? Who takes charge of the offensive line as far as leadership goes? And the same thing goes, who takes charge of the cornerback room? All those things we won't know by the end of OTAs. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. But most likely we won't know them, but we will at least have notes that we're adding to our package to understand what we're looking at for the Pittsburgh Steelers roster going into training camp. So with all that being said, thank you for checking out the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Appreciate everybody who's able to check us out all week long. We thank all of our listeners, all of our viewers. You guys are awesome. You guys have been boosting our numbers up all throughout, even before the draft going into this year. It's been amazing. We're excited to keep bringing you this coverage every single day, Monday through Friday, as well as our bonus episodes and our breaking news updates whenever those do happen. And we'll keep you up to date with your Pittsburgh Steelers as the season goes along. Follow me at Twitter and on Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at Steelers Now. If you want to check out my written work, I have a new Carter's Classroom film study on Calvin Austin that'll be up by then. So check me out there when you get the chance. Also, if you want to check out this show or any other show, you could find the Locked On Steelers podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, or YouTube. Like this video if you saw it on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus episodes and our bonus contents and breaking news updates. Have a great weekend, everybody. I'll be back Monday with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm Chris Carter. We'll see you then.